So yeah, I'm sorry my video just cut. So we'll carry on from where we left off, and we mentioned obviously the foundations of what constitutes marriage or how marriage came about, and we're talking about primary instincts. Firstly, the instinct to mate is for the propagation of the species. But then the species don't only need to be propagated, or in other words, we don't only need babies to be born, we also need babies to be looked after. And hence, mating often comes along with emotional connection between the parties, between the male and female. This emotional connection is there to facilitate longevity in the relationship, at least long enough for the children to be looked after and grow up and be raised well. Okay. Thereafter, there's also the issue of propriety, that is the man's assertion that the woman belong to him, they are his woman. This is there to facilitate the connection between the man and the children, because it follows that if the woman does belong to him, that which issues forth from her, from his seed, belongs to him, and because they belong to him, it's his responsibility, and therefore this facilitates that the man actually has and maintains a connection with the children, and the children therefore now have a father. And so these three things together, is what early, marriage, the building blocks of marriage basically, and what marriage still by and large consists of or consisted of. There are obviously significant differences now in recent times. That are largely facilitated by technology, the technology of birth control, which allows women to be more free regarding their sexuality. That is because it takes away the natural consequences of very likely falling pregnant from a sexual relationship. Women can now have sexual relationships and not fall pregnant, or to a very high degree, they can very aptly, prevent themselves from falling pregnant through the use of contraception. That obviously makes women more free to sleep around. It also makes men more free to sleep around because they don't have to be fathers of children for every woman they sleep with. They don't need to sire children into the world. So that obviously changes a lot in the building blocks of what constitutes a marriage. And so we see that even the natural jealousy, for example, of men over women is also a way to maintain exclusivity in the relationship. That is, the woman is because of the man's natural jealousy and possessiveness over her, it reinforces his sense of propriety. It also helps prevent the woman from going outside of that union, and reinforces the man's paternity. Okay, we are talking about the longest period in human history where there very little evidence suggests that they had paternity tests, foolproof paternity tests, DNA testing, and all of these types of things. And so these were sort of the building blocks of what built societies and civilizations, what prevented war, and also to a large extent disease. Because yes, while men could plow 2 farms or 3 farms as it were, and that's just a metaphor for having 2 or 3 or several women, wives or concubines, these women were not allowed to have several farmers. Okay, so they could only basically sow the seeds of one man, which means that whatever, if he happened to have any STDs, then it would not have gone beyond his share of women, because there was no sexual communism, of course. So anyway, this is kind of the building block of the story. Okay, so you can see that a lot of what we consider and we looked at in a very disjointed fashion is actually part of a greater scheme, which in the end boils down to survival, basically, survival of the species. All these feelings, emotions, intentions, jealousies, and all of that has to do with the survival of the species. The key factor, obviously, in a union is actually children, okay? At the basic building block of it. Of course, there are the emotional factors which are just as important or nearly as important. I can't say just as important, obviously, where people do, because we were essentially created in pairs. So it's unnatural. No one was meant to be essentially alone, basically. Okay, that's so because we were not created to be alone, there will always be a yearning to pair up with somebody. Okay, and I'm using the word pair because that is sort of the building block, the basis of it. Right, so now moving along, having just basically described marriage as evolving around three things, which is first, again, the natural attraction between male and female, which is actually spurred by the biological need to procreate. But then after procreation, it requires more the emotional connection between the male and female to perpetuate a long-term relationship, long enough at least, to bring or to help cooperate with each other to rear strong children who can survive. And then the third thing is propriety, mainly the propriety of the male over the female, which is there to connect the father with the children. So those are the three things in summary which constitute marriage, essentially. So that's where marriage comes from. Okay. Moving forward, of course, we know that many of these things that historically constituted marriage is being challenged, and has been challenged by the onset of birth control, technology, modern technology, and of course feminism. So when we come to the subject of polygyny, the obvious question is, why would the world need polygyny? Why would polygyny be conducive, to society, better functioning or worse functioning for that matter? Why? Just why polygyny? Why do we even need it? Why can't people just, pair bond one male to one female for all eternity and everyone kind of lives happily ever after? That's like the question I think that many people ask, and it's a question that deserves to be answered. And I'm going to set out in the series of videos basically to answer that question, bi'idhnillah. So firstly, let me just say from the outset that going back to the issue of species and its survival, okay, we know from genetic studies that people are physically the product of their DNA. Okay, people are physically the product of their DNA. Okay, in early societies, the way that nature filtered out the weak genes from the strong genes was through the male exhibiting superior strength. The male that exhibited superior strength secured the most women. Let me say that again. The male that exhibited superior strength secured the most women. So what does that mean? It means that women tended to flock around the best provider, and the best provider in the early period of our existence was the strongest man. Okay, you needed brains, but you needed also brawn, and you needed more brawn often than brains. And so what would happen is that because a woman especially in that time, in the absence of birth control, was not just a woman, she was potentially a mother, okay? And her psychology is such that she knows that if she's going to mate with a guy, okay, those three things I spoke of are going to take place, okay? Mating, emotional attachment, propriety, right? And that now she belongs to the guy that she has mated with. She is also likely to fall pregnant, and through falling pregnant, she is disadvantaged in that she's not able to, during that phase of her being pregnant, she's not able to sufficiently provide for herself. So if she was hunting before, she's no longer going to be able to hunt. If she was picking berries or going out, she's not going to be able to do that, at least for some time. And she's going to be physically disabled. Also, she's going to have to dedicate her attention to suckling and nursing and raising this infant. And human beings do this for a long time. So there's 2 years at least, okay, where the infant is at its most vulnerable. So because she knew that all these things has to take place, she has the natural inclination to attach herself to the strongest possible male she can find, who is going to be able to hunt for her and provide for her for at least these 2 years, for when she has to nurse and look after this infant. Right. Now, when given those options, when you live so close to nature and it's survival at stake, okay, women would attach themselves to the strongest male even if he had other females, right? She would attach, this is called hypergamy, okay? She would attach herself to the strongest male, though he has other females, despite that he has other females, because in order for her to procreate, which is what she wants to do, her natural instinct to want to give birth, to deliver a child into the world, right? She's going to need someone to provide for her, at least for those 2 years. And that's not going to happen with a man who is not adequately equipped to do so. Okay, that's the one. So what did that guarantee? It guaranteed that the man with the strongest genes, which means he has the best brawns and the best wits, right, would sire the most children. In so doing, in him siring the most children, he'd be propagating stronger genes. Okay? The men who are less capable would sire less children, if at all, if they happen to sire children, that is, and their weaker genetic pool would die out, and so the genetic pool of the species would evolve over time constantly to or adapt to survive, the various diseases and challenges, genetic challenges that would exist throughout, throughout the future, basically. So this is how nature and society kind of saw to it that we have gotten this far, basically, as a species. Now, in these type of societies, were you to want to have sex with a woman, as of course most men would want to do, because it is it's a defining characteristic, or it's a defining characteristic of malehood, right? To be able to sire children, to have women and to impregnate them. You would need to present yourself as a suitable male. And because women would go with the highest value males, right, even if he has a number of women, right, the competition was that much tougher, right? So if you were a loser, you would lose out. Basically, you would not be able to mate. So that meant that men had to work that much harder at being men. This also helped civilization emerge, because it meant that men who had less brawn and maybe more brains, perhaps, right, would evolve more sophisticated methods to secure property and wealth and food so that they can also have women, right? And through that activity, they would evolve technology over time. Okay, so whereas now, for example, a guy can be extremely weak, sit behind a computer all day, and have scores of women, right? Because of the assistance of external factors, technology, which through genius was evolved in order to sort of try to set the playing field equal. That has its own problems. We will discuss that later, okay? But this is kind of the evolution of society. So from this brief explanation, why polygyny, the first reason is genetics, basically, okay? The highest value men should sire the most children, because that's how the species has survived up to this point. That's how the species will survive into the future. Right, that's the first point. And this happens naturally whether you like it or not, by the way. This is not, I'm not trying to say subscribe to my ideals. Okay, I'm just stating what happens, okay? Whether people practice polygyny openly or whether they don't, okay? Many men sire children with many women, whether they are married to them or not, and that's just a fact, okay? How they choose to go about it, of course, that's an issue we're going to discuss later on, okay? But does it happen? Yes, it does. Does it happen often? Yes, it does. Is it the natural order? Yes, it is. Basically, that's what I'm saying. Okay. So why polygamy? It's just pure survival of the species. Okay. The next thing is, and I've already alluded to it, polygyny, of course, once it's accepted in society, allows for a woman to pursue high value males openly, not covertly, and be treated as legitimate partners of high value males openly and not covertly. And why is this a significant thing? Well, first of all, it's significant because it happens anyway, though it may happen in some places covertly. The fact that it happens anyway, and that it will happen, and that it will continue to happen, means it's an accepted thing that needs to be, rather than people turning a blind eye to it, rather than sweeping things under the carpet, rather than pretending that the monogamous ideal is real, might as well embrace the reality and ride that wave in a more realistic and feasible and functional fashion. So what I'm saying is that, look, since I can't say most, but since many women are in any case sharing their men with other women, whether they know it or whether they don't, okay, you are better off, regulating the process by legitimately sharing your man, because it's not really your man to begin with, but legitimately being part of a polygynous union where you are able to manage the outcome. Okay, that's what smart woman would do, right? So instead of leaving it open to loose ends, right? Having men out there, and there are even politicians and people in high up places that have illegitimate children all over the world, right? Instead of having that, having children suffer from not having this connection with their fathers, which we said what marriage is for in the first place, right? You manage the process where men have legitimate relationships with several women and lay claim and responsibility for the children they have from that woman, and sire those children and give those women stable married lives, albeit less than full time, albeit although it might be part time somewhat. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is that, look, when we have the reality and we admit the reality, we have to find out how do we harness what we know instead of rejecting, what is, and kind of turning a blind eye to things. So my sort of thing is, point number 2 is that polygyny will basically save society from a lot of the illicit relationships that are going on. And I'm not saying save society from the illicit relationships because it's wrong in religion. I'm not only saying that. I'm saying saving society from the illicit relationships because it's harmful to society. It is harmful to the accidental child that is born outside of wedlock and who is not fathered or sired by a father and doesn't connect with his father and doesn't connect with its siblings from the legitimate wife, okay, the siblings of the legitimate wife. It is also harmful for women because these women never or seldom go on to have stable relationships or get married because they lose the ability to pair bond, since the natural inclination of a woman is to pair bond with one man and be and sire or give birth to children from that one man, and not to have several men. And so this is part 1. We will go on to part 2 where we will explore the topic further. Thank you very much.